Okay, so today we're contrasting man's leadership. This is now under a monarchy because the people have now rejected God. Again, we're still in the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel. The people have rejected God. They've demanded a king. God has listed to them the things that the king will claim as his rights over them. They've said, we don't mind. Go ahead. We're in for the win. And so God tells Samuel, give them a king. Saul is appointed as their king. And so we're still looking at life under a theocracy compared to life under the monarchy that they demanded. So with the establishment of the monarchy, Israel began to rely on human kings who governed using conventional military strategies and resources such as armies, horses, chariots, which marked a significant departure from reliance on God's miraculous intervention. In demanding for a king, Israel sought to emulate the nations around them who relied on powerful armies and advanced weaponry like chariots and horses. Man, I am just thinking about man and how easily we are deceived by that which we see with our eyes. Imagine Israel watching all the nations around them, concluding that these nations are powerful, envying their equipments of war, their show of might, yet all the while forgetting that God is liberating them from all these people, that God is winning battles for them. They keep advancing, they keep gaining land, they're getting attacked. Remember when the Amalekites attacked the most vulnerable of them and they suffered God's judgment years later for that? But you can imagine that they're seeing God's protection over them. They're seeing mighty armies coming after them. They're seeing those mighty armies rout supernaturally, take the Egyptians, following them on their horses and chariots, and then getting covered by the Red Sea and just dying, drowning out while they walked across. All these miracles, but we fail to see the goodness of God, and we're still demanding to look like the other nations around us. And I know I'm eisegizing. I don't mean to do that. Exegesis. So all those miracles they're seeing happening around them, and yet they still admire what they're seeing around them with their physical eyes, and they're preferring that over the miracles and victories that God is routing through them for them and for his own glory. So when we look at Saul as king, we can see that he embodied this reliance on human effort. In 1 Samuel 13, he offered a burnt sacrifice himself, prioritizing military expediency over obedience to God's command to wait for Samuel to arrive. So now we get to compare earthly wisdom versus divine wisdom. Human kings often relied on conventional strategies instead of relying on God's wisdom. In 1 Samuel 17, Saul's failure to fight Goliath himself and his insistence on equipping David with armor highlight his dependence on human strength, whereas David trusted in God's power with a sling and a stone. Again, what we believe will reflect in our actions. The contents of our hearts will come through our words and our actions. David was a man after God's heart, not even just because he was king. This was clear. That is why he was chosen. From when he was a young lad, he was a man after God's heart. That's why he knew some trust in horses, others trust in chariots, but we trust in the name of the Lord. And that's exactly what he told Goliath. You come to me with your bows, you come to me with your arrows, but I come to you in the name of the Lord. Amen. I love this. So by relying on human wisdom, kings often missed opportunities to glorify God through the miraculous victories he would have rather rout them. And then again, when we read 1 Samuel 8 from 11 to 18, we can see that they are warned that kings would draft their sons, take their resources, and impose taxes to sustain military campaigns. The monarchy placed significant burdens on the people to maintain armies and to fund wars. This contrasted with God's leadership, which required obedience and faith, rather than material contributions or sacrifice for human rulers. So now when we look at God's strategy versus man's strategy, first of all, under God, he favors faith over force. God's leadership often requires Israel to step out in faith, trusting him even when the odds seem impossible. Case in point, Joshua 3:15 to 17, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant stepped into the flooded Jordan River before the waters parted. Faith. Judges 7:2, God deliberately reduced Gideon's army to ensure Israel would not take credit for the victory. Again, faith. Who goes to war with 300 men? You literally had 3,000. You had to pare it down. You had to do another round of reduction. And then when you have 300 men, God says, fine, now that's the army. Go fight. Faith. But now when you contrast that to human strategy, the monarchy introduced a shift towards human control reflecting Israel's desire to be like other nations. In 1 Samuel 8, the people said, "We want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." This revealed their rejection of God's leadership and their preference for visible human authority. But that came with theological implications. The transition from theocracy to monarchy underscores several key truths about God and human nature, I guess, and the differences thereof. For one, we see that God desires faith and obedience. God's miraculous strategies demonstrate that victory is not achieved by might or power, but by his spirit. And we read this in Zechariah 4:6. Human leadership, on the other hand, is imperfect. Even with the best of them, case in point, David. He was the best king Israel ever had before Jesus, but he was still fallible and could not replace God's perfect leadership. But not to worry, because again, God can work through our free will to still bring about his purposes. The kingship of David, the kingship that the Israelites demanded, first starting with Saul, passing on to David, it finally birthed the King of Kings, Jesus Christ, who would lead perfectly in justice, humility, and reliance on God's will, thereby embodying the ultimate theocracy, reconciling God's authority and human leadership. So what are the key takeaways? I think for one, we are called to really learn to trust in God and to obey him. We might desire to rely on human strength and human strategy and human brute force and might and power, but at the end of the day, true victory can only come through dependence and reliance on God, which comes through faith. Another thing is we should learn to avoid the temptation of seizing control for ourselves. We should resist the urge to seek human solutions for spiritual problems, and we should instead seek God's wisdom and guidance. And yeah, sometimes his strategies seem unconventional, they're almost counterintuitive, but when you know his voice and you know oh man, I have a testimony, don't I have, but it's my son's testimony, so it's probably not mine to share. But sometimes God would call you to do something so counterintuitive to what you think is right. And you think, oh my gosh, if I let go, everything's going to crumble. But you're called to obedience. If you obey, it will firm back up. You'll actually see that it turned out even better than if you had insisted on holding on to control of those things. And thankfully for us, we have Jesus as our perfect example. Remember, again, we are not supposed to be conformed to this world. The Israelites wanted a king so they could be like all the other nations around them. That's not what we're supposed to be asking for. Quite the opposite. We're supposed to be depending on faith. We're supposed to be depending on our God to see us through. And we have Jesus as the perfect example. We will not stop until Christ is formed in us. Bye.